Hi everyone, thanks for coming and listening to this. So a quick panel around standardizing stuff on Starknet. To start this off, maybe we should present ourselves. Start with you, Abdel.
Again, okay.
Sorry.
It will be boring. Okay, so just a software engineer, work in 8 years in fintech industry, then work 4 years as Ethereum core developer, moving to Cosmos, now back to Ethereum, and joining Starkware and working with those amazing guys, and yeah, very happy.
Adrien Croubois, I'm a software developer at OpenZeppelin, mostly focusing on the Solidity smart contracts. But as you may know, OpenZeppelin is also looking at Caro lately. And apart from that, I've been involved in this community for a long time, particularly with the East Magician on the ERC project, not as a core dev, more as on the ERC side.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Tom. So, yeah, first of all, I want to say that, I don't know, for me, it's a very exciting day. I mean, it's really mind-blowing. All the workshops, all the people, even you coming to listen to Standardizing Starknet, to me, it's mind-blowing. So, yeah, I just wanted to share that. Thank you to Only Dust for organizing it. Okay. And I'm Tom. I'm from Starkware. 4 years at Starkware, and I'm now the product lead of Starknet. No experience in standardizing stuff, but I'll get it.
Cool, and I'm Stan. I'm not on the slide, but I swear I'm invited. And so I'm the tech lead at Only Dust, and I've also no experience in standardizing like a blockchain product, but let's do this.
All right, so I'll start with the first question that maybe some of you are maybe asking yourselves is the title here is Starknet with SNIPs, but we all know it's SIMPs. And so, is it SNIPs or is it SIMPs?
You want to take it or?
I think it's Louis. I think it's Louis who said SIMPs in the first place, if I remember correctly.
We created a repo with SIMPs, and everyone is talking about SIMP in the Telegram core stars channel. I like it. I know that there is a bad connotation to the term for some people.
That's what I was looking at, Tom, exactly.
Maybe, Tom, you want to give more about your opinion about that, but it's important to standardize the name of the standardization.
Exactly.
Let's take 30 minutes to talk about the name of it.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion about that. Just that SNIP is, cool, nice, chic. And SIMP, I mean, I'm not an native English speaker, but from what I understand, is not like the best word. But, and since we still don't have, any simps, so yeah.
We have some.
We have some, okay.
Okay, anyway. Well, this morning I looked for Starknet SNIP, and I didn't find anything. But then I typed Starknet SIMP, and I found something.
Yeah, there's a big discovery problem. We need people to be able to find that.
So for the moment, we'll stick with SIMPs if you're okay.
I'm okay.
All right, cool.
Fine.
So my first question was, I think SIMPs are based on EIPs, Ethereum Improvement Proposals, and SIMPs are Starknet Improvement Proposals. The first question was for Adrien, who said you were coming from the Ethereum Magicians group. Can you explain us how it works for EIPs and ERCs, and maybe what we're missing here and what we're not missing?
So basically, the Ethereum world is by design decentralized. That means that a lot of software and developer will have to work together. It starts by like the nodes themselves that have to be able to communicate, have to agree on what the consensus is. So whenever there is an evolution of the consensus, it has to be like set in stone very clearly. That's what EIPs are basically. Now, it went beyond that in the sense that there is also a lot of things that need to be standardized for like DeFi to work. Like contracts have to be somehow generic. Like imagine if all tokens had different function and events, that would be terrible. So basically it's the same process in both cases because it's the same repo, the same editors, but it's completely different design and workflow. Like having an EIP accepted means that you have to propose something that goes into the client, so the core dev have to agree. There is these old core dev meetings that are super important, and it gets through hard forks and everything. Whereas ERCs are just like, hey, as a community, we want to agree on an app, something like that. And basically, the core dev don't care. It's like user space for them, so it's irrelevant. And yeah, and there is also already an issue in this space as far as Ethereum goes, that it's the same workflow for two things very different, and it's basically broken right now. Having an ERC finalized, it's painful, and at the same time, you want to have a very strong EIP process because it's core to the protocol.
I wanted to emphasize on something that I think is very important, is the core difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum, is that on Bitcoin, the reference is the code itself and Bitcoin Core, and Ethereum, there is a specification, and this is very different because the specification is the source of truth, and this is very important for example, diversity of clients, and make sure that everything is interoperable. And yeah, this is very a different paradigm that is very important. Just to explain why is that important to have this level of standardization and specification, because this is the source of truth for everyone in the space. So.
Particularly in a context where Bitcoin is a protocol that is almost immutable. It doesn't really evolve. Ethereum is constantly evolving. We are waiting for the merge, but after the merge, we have Shanghai. We have a lot of things that are in the pipeline. And it's important so that in this continuity, we have a source of ground truth, because we cannot just use one implementation. Implementation are always changing.
Yeah, maybe the only thing that's different in Starknet is that you have the statement that is being proven, right? Which is defined by the Starknet OS. The Starknet OS is a Cairo program that basically gets us input a block and execute it and update the state and outputs, I don't know, events, messages, etc., etc. So in that sense, there is some similarity to Bitcoin, because at the end, this is what is being proven. And this is in some way like reference implementation. In Cairo, for the EIPs, right? Not for the ERCs. So it's interesting how we should approach it.
What's the current state regarding SIMPs, and we don't have a name for SRCs, Starknet request for comments? What's the current state? We have a repo. Where do we talk about it? Who's behind the repo?
Yeah. Interesting question. So yes, we have a repo. We defined the process. Usually, let's say you have an idea, you should start by writing a post on Shamans, which is equivalent of It Magicians on Ethereum. So this is a forum for everyone to discuss about changes. This is the first step. If you have an idea, you need to first challenge this idea with people in the community before writing the SIMP. It is to filter and to avoid some noise on the repo. So yes, we have one repo. For the moment, it is in a separate organization, a GitHub organization. We need to talk about that. Where should it live? There is a repo, and there are currently 3 SIMPs, I think. There was an interesting discussion about the numeration and the identification of SIMPs. For example, about ERC20. Should we have a SIMP 20 because everyone is used to the 20 number, or should we have a complete different numeration? So we chose to have a completely separate numeration, and for example, SIMP 2 is the equivalent of ERC20. So
yeah, we didn't say where the ERC and EIP numbers come from. That's an important part of that. ERC and EIP, basically the number that gets assigned to them is a number of the issue or pull request on the Ethereum EIP GitHub. So like considering that their numbering comes from like a counter that is on their side, if you wanted to copy that and have additional stuff that is specific to Starknet, it would cause conflict.
And so who's behind the repo currently? Do you know?
Currently, me and Jag from Sekai project, and the organization is Cairo Open. So Cairo Open, but we can definitely move to another organization. Maybe it should live under a Starkware organization. Maybe not.
No, there is the Starknet community libs, where we have get Starknet, the library, and we have I think Starknet specs and Starknet addresses. So this makes sense in my opinion. But okay. Yeah, I think that apart from, you want to talk? Yeah, apart from this repo, there is a very important work that's been done on standardizing accounts, right? Since we have account abstraction, then even though you should have multiple implementations, there should be some standardization, for example, for single key account or stuff like that. And this is a really good work that's being done by Open Zeppelin, Marto, and Argent, and now Bravos are joining. And this is done completely on the shamans. So we should think on, do we want to move it or not? But this is also a kind of standardization that is being done by the ones that are de facto building the accounts.
And to add something on the question of the numeration of the SIMs, I think like trying to follow what has been done in Ethereum can be misleading if, for example, for some reason, but maybe that will be a next question, we want or not to follow the standards already existing in terms of the shape of the standard or the signature of the functions. And so if you follow these, but you have some difference, then why follow the same number if it's in the end a different standard?
What happened when we have a SIMP20 that is absolutely not a fungible token?
Yeah.
And I mean, also something that we have to, I think it's important and we can learn from Ethereum is also like SIMP1, I think, is a copy of ERC1, if I'm not mistaken, or EIP1. And EIP1 is basically the EIP that defines how EIP are governed. And one thing that is part of EIP1 that is also part of SIMP1 is the fact that they are supposed to be like editors. Like, I mean, in the Ethereum world, there are people that are in charge of maintaining and reviewing. It's a very long process. Like, sometimes we don't like these guys because they always ask us to edit stuff, but in the end, they are essential to the quality of the NDIPs. And as far as I know, I just checked a few minutes ago, I don't think anybody is like officially a SIMP editor. So that's one thing. Another thing is that the EIP lives under the Ethereum GitHub repo, which basically is attached somehow to the foundation. As Starknet is evolving, getting decentralized and getting a foundation, I think this should be part of the mission of the foundation to also organize this entire process.
That was my second question. It was regarding Tom. What's the current stance at Starknet about like what you should be hosting, what you shouldn't be hosting? What's the community's job? What's not the community's job?
I don't see my role as creating the standards for the community, right? So this is actually not something that's being done by me or by the internal team, and I think it's good. First of all, we probably are not the one that's actively building, and if you're talking about the standards, then I don't think we have all the state. So this is one thing. On hosting, I mean, currently development of the core parts of Starknet is being done exclusively by us, right? Hopefully, sooner rather than later, it will change. But I still don't know exactly how it will look like. So, yeah, I mean, more and more parts that we're now building. Okay, Starknet, the way we started it was just, I mean, let's release a Starknet Alpha, right? It was based heavily on the infrastructure of StarkX, which was an internal repo. And so we just, in order to do things fast, we just took that, and this is why Chirolang is being periodically externalized, right? It's not like okay. But now more and more parts are being rebuilt from scratch, not in this repo, but in an external repo. Now, where we should host it, I don't know. It's a good question. We didn't think about it. But those parts, for example, the full node that will be the basis for the sequencer is now in an external repo. The new compiler that Shachar presented is an external repo. Cleopatra, the Cairo VM. A new sequencer we will start building it, I don't know, a month from now. It will probably in a different repo. Same for approval, right? We need approval for anyone to run. This will be in a different repo. So it will be built part by part. We shouldn't host it, right? It's not what we want to do.
Yeah, I wanted to add something about SIMP1 being a copy of EIP1. It was just to kickstart the initiative, but actually I strongly believe that we should think the model very differently, especially because we want to go towards decentralized governance. And this is a huge difference because the token will play a big part in the governance. So for sure, we need to define in the process what is the role of the token and how it is linked to, for example, the protocol upgrades and stuff like that. So we have very strong, a very big difference in paradigm with Ethereum, and we should definitely have that as part of the process.
Yeah, the consensus approach is really important in the sense that Ethereum upgrades are basically done by the miners, at least for now. I mean, this is obviously not how it's thought of, but basically people propose change, and then the change go into the clients, but the change is only effective when the miner do the change.
I think it's much more complicated than that. Actually, it's a hot topic today because ultimately, full nodes are not forced to follow the miners, and ultimately what matters also is what exchanges reference and what the market price.
True.
It's not as easy as to define, but there is a social consensus. But
in proof of work, you need mining power behind the majority chain, and in the past we've seen cases where there have been strong discussion between the core dev and the miners, and the community, and the community was sometimes a bit lost, and the power of the core dev was sometimes not seen in a good way by the community. I think it's a shame, but it happened. But with Starknet, we are in a very different concept of chain where the upgrades are done very differently, and we could have the upgrades governed by the token, governed on chain by the community. So that completely changes the approach. The role of the core dev is definitely different, and I think that's also mean that the whole organization should be different. Like, for example, in Ethereum, we have the cat herders that try to improve communication between core dev and the rest of the community. Hopefully, this is something we'll never need in Starknet.
Yeah. It's important to focus on what you said about the political stuff we had with miners around EIP 1559. I think we need to think from the beginning how to include all stakeholders of the ecosystem in the discussions and not to wait, because, for example, for 1559, we took more than 8 months to actively involve miners in the discussion. It led to big issues. So we need to think how to include all stakeholders. So that means different sequencers, provers, builders, everyone, actually, token holders, and yeah.
So I have a question regarding this. We can foresee that if you start to open source the prover or the sequencer or whatever it will be, at first kind of reference implementation, as you described with Bitcoin, for example, but it will soon be a coexistence of many implementation of this. For example, we see already this today with the VM itself, the Cairo VM. So is it the plan to use the SIMs to abstract this and make a specification of what should be all this kind of basic technical bricks, or is it, what's the plan for this?
Definitely. Those are core EIPs, basically. And this is very important for interoperability. And you wanted to add something before I jump in?
I just want to say, like, this, the ERPs, it's not the spec, it's the delta on the spec. And the spec are the yellow paper. So we also need an equivalent to the yellow paper.
Well, just to come back to the example of the Cairo VM, if you just read the white paper, you don't end up with the very strong idea on how to implement it, like, concretely. So
exactly, this is when we need another level of paper which will define more the architecture. I wanted to add that besides SIMPs, etc., an important aspect for interoperability is testing. And one good thing we have on Ethereum is the reference test, and it ensures any client to have a test suite to run to make sure that the implementation is correct and is aligned with the specification. So we should start that sooner rather than later. Reference tests speed up a lot the development of new implementation of full nodes, everything, because it will be easy for the developers to make sure that they have a correct implementation. And it's very important to focus on the reference test as well.
Abdel, I think you were an EIP champion for a long time. What were I think you mentioned one. What were the main pain points, and what would you like to change to this whole process?
Yeah. So EIP 1559 was very special because it was the biggest change ever. It was complex technically, politically, economically speaking. So it is not the reflect of all EIPs, but still we can take some lessons from that. As I said, I think we should have involved all stakeholders in the discussion from the beginning. But the thing is it was special because the original idea was proposed in 2018, but then everyone gave up saying it was too complex, etc., etc. And then we had a long time to prove that it could be done, etc. And during that time, I was mainly working alone on that for 6 months, and then people started to gain interest on that. And so I think we should have also a clear process about what are the important things to validate for EIPs, like, for example, security, economic attack vectors, all those stuff should be also part of the process. It's good to have a reference and to have a checklist of things to validate before moving to another stage. And to have objective criteria helps to avoid subjective conflicts. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. I had a couple of questions here about things that are ongoing. Mainly, I think we had a little bit discussed about this already, about ERC20 and SIM20 or SIM2 or SIM3, etc. What's the current situation about this? Did we finally agree to use a different numbering? And how about casing? Because casing is important.
Yeah. So for the numbering, I think we all agreed, unless yeah. But my main concern is about having competing standards for token, for example, because we can see some flaws in existing ERC20 token. For the moment, we want to have compatibility because it's easier for dApps and people to move to the standard. On the other hand, we have powerful features in Starknet like account abstraction that can enable a bunch of use cases and improve the UX drastically, just meaning that we will define a way better standard for tokens. But the risk is that we will have competing token standards, and that can hurt strongly the interoperability, because then you maybe need some adapters that will be able to bridge one standard to another, etc. So I see that as a risk to have competing standards. I don't know what you guys think about the risk of competing standards for tokens.
You mentioned the example of the dApps willing to have the same standard in order to be compatible with both. I think basically, if you want to, well, the use case for this would be like, I don't know, I can deal with ERC20s on Ethereum and SIM20 or whatever on Starknet. If you build the dApp, you will have this adapter because you don't address the same blockchain. So in the end, it's not the same code. So I think it can be a human bias to have in mind that you have to keep compatible, because in the end, using one is really different from using the other. So you won't be compatible from the start. So I think we should try to think without this in mind, because you cannot be compatible all along. So I think we should embrace the fact that it's not compatible. So let's just learn the lessons from the previous standard, which is ERC20, and make a better one on Starknet.
Just about that, there are two kinds of burden: the burden for the developers and the burden for the users. I'm not worried about the burden for developers, because we impose them a very huge pressure, which is to have a new language. So the overhead of having a different standard is negligible compared to... But I'm more thinking about the user experience. That was what I wanted to say.
Yeah, but I mean, we have both this curse and this blessing that we have this historical thing that users and developers are used to, and we want to be as close to it as possible. But at the same time, we have a lot of history, of vision. We know what's wrong with them. And we have a unique opportunity to build a system where we address some of the issue we know. Obviously, there are issues that we still not know on Ethereum that we also ignore on Starknet and that we will repeat. But some stuff we know and we can possibly fix. One of the things I'm thinking about is that about ERC20, there have been a lot of proposal to extend and improve ERC20. This includes the permit mechanism, which we don't really need because we have account abstraction. It includes like voting stuff that is optional, but like even into core ERC20, like name and symbols and decimals are optional, which can in some cases cause issues. And there is also this ERC that everybody forgot, that is 1363, that is a transfer in call, which has basically no adoption, which has been debated lastly because possibly the document is ambiguous because it was not written properly in the first place, even though it's final. But like we know all these things, and since if we are not sticking with the numbers, and let's just take whatever is best in the ERC20 world, like let's keep the approve and transfer stuff, even though we don't like them, but add additional stuff so that or SIMP2 or SIMP3, I don't remember the exact name, would be like an ERC20 plus on steroid, where we fixed like dates from 2016, like we fixed 6 years of stuff at the same time. So we can make it better, we can make it standard, we can make it clearer because we have this experience. Now this works for ERC20 because it's so old. For other ERCs, we will still be in the same trouble, but at least for the core stuff, we can do it right.
I completely agree with that, 100%. There is the topic of using UINT 256, which put a lot of burden to. I guess it was one of your questions.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, this is a very hot topic. Honestly, it's boring to handle two fields to represent an amount for a token. We don't need to. I don't think so. For example, you don't need 18 decimals at all. So, for example, on Cosmos, all tokens have 6 decimals only. So, and it works. So
even with 18 decimal, is there any token on mainnet right now that doesn't fit into a field? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the ints, we learned this morning that in Cairo 1.0 it will be native. Well, native in terms of compiler. So that's another discussion.
But it has an overhead on performance. So if you
Maybe
we could decide to completely remove and use one field to represent an amount, that would work, and that would be more efficient and take less storage as well. And do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I'm not sure it should have an effect on performance because you can have it in a way that if you really don't use the second field, then it's transparent. But I mean, I think that at least for the ERC20, when this discussion happened, I don't know, 6 months ago, you can see it on the, I think, Open Zeppelin repo on the Cairo contracts. So the discussion, I think it wasn't my opinion, but most opinions were, let's stick with the ability to, for example, when I deposit, transfer funds from Ethereum to Starknet, let's not create this edge case and have the same interface of the UINT 256. So I think that at least for ERC20, this was back then the decision, and this is also how the standard is being implemented. Hopefully it will be less pain in the next version of Cairo, right? So you won't have to deal with the library, it will be just a type.
Yeah, but it's not just about numbers, because it's easy to say like, yeah, we used UINT 256 for balances and it never overflows a felt, so let's just use a felt. But like the UINT 256, it's a representation of the fact that in Solidity the word size is 256 bits, and this also goes into the byte 32, and there are many other cases where UINT 256 equivalent types are used, like token IDs in ERC 721, and you don't have to mint them sequentially. Token IDs in 1155, and if you go to stuff that is non-standard, like what we have in Open Zeppelin, we have this access control contract that I think is great, that uses roles for your administration, and roles are represented by a byte 32, which is often the hash of something. And like here we really had this question of what do we use, because honestly, like the uint 256 doesn't really make sense. And if we have a felt, it's like security is like there is no going to be any collision on the world, so it's good enough. But then which hash function do we use to produce that? Because like we could use arbitrary values. It's just like like a common practice to use a hash function here. And do we want these numbers to somehow match between Solidity and Cairo? I'm not sure it's important, but like this is a discussion we go. It's beyond just typical stuff. It's like it goes into like, yeah, if you have a UI that manages your permission on the blockchain, like Defender built that other projects are building always, we will want this tooling to also serve the Cairo ecosystem. And how far do we want consistency in the way stuff is represented?
Yeah. I am wondering if we won't have another level of complexity regarding the power feature, which is L1, L2 messaging, because that means that some dApps will be splitted between L1 contracts and L2 contracts. So what do we do? Yeah, I mean, we could just say we comply with ERC20 on the L1 side and SIPs on, but with the messaging, maybe it could introduce some difficulties if we, like just what you said about the hash function. If you want to compute a hash on the L1, put a message to the L2, yeah, it can be somehow problematic, yeah.
Yeah, you have a complex stuff, you hash it on L1, you just pass the hash because it's cheaper, and then you want to reproduce the hash on the other hand, and yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a topic about felts in uint 256, and I think there's a big topic around casing also. I think what happened historically is that we all, at least I think me and my friends, that's what we did. We looked at the Cairo code and stuff that Starkware wrote, and the standard was snake case, so we decided to go with it. But then now we ask the question about compatibility with ERC20 or existing ERCs, and but if we will live in a multi-chain environment, how are we going to deal with this? And do we really want to make an edge case for Starkware, or is it going to add yet another burden on top of it?
I think we can link that to good design in terms of how you design your smart contracts. Usually, most of people write a library.cairo file where you have all your logic, and in this file you should comply with the snake case model, and then you have your Starknet contract that uses those library function, and then it's fine to maybe to export them as even both if you want, but yeah, maybe not. But I mean, it's flexible, and the more important for me is the library part of things and how you test it and how you, and then this is just a matter of exporting functions. But I agree, it's important. Yeah.
I'm talking for you. I mean, I think that again, and whatever they decide, but I think that currently all the standard contracts of OpenZeppelin are written in a way that the external functions are camel case, right? So they decided that this will be their standard, and sounds good to me.
Yeah. What I also want to say is that as far as standardization goes, like the external function, we need to standardize them because that's what people are going to code. Like internally, if you wanted to build your own contract with even another case, like it would not break anything. So it's important to have standardization for stuff that matters. For stuff that is just like good practice, I don't care where you put your semicolon or like your accolade. I would say accolade in English. Oh yeah, do you put your brackets on the same lines or on the following lines? Like we don't care and we don't have to care because that doesn't change how your contract interacts. The important part is like the external interface because that's what you're going to code. No, for ERC20, we went with camel case because we wanted the function selector to be somehow similar, and then we went like saying like, yeah, but when it's not an ERC, when it's not standardized in the ERC process, maybe we want to go with snake case. And then very funny corner case happens. Like you have this ownable contract by OpenZeppelin, which people don't know, but it follows an ERC, which is ERC 173. And so the transfer ownership function is standardized in the ERC. So technically you should use camel case. But at OpenZeppelin, for security reason, we also have a renounce ownership function that is different. That is the only way for you to renounce the ownership. And this one is not part of the standard. So technically, if you were very strict, this one would be snake case. And you would have one external camel and one external snake. And it gets messy. And there is also the thing that a lot of contracts in Ethereum, in Solidity, are sometimes standardized after the fact. It's not how it should work, but it sometimes happens, like with the permit stuff for ERC20. So if the stuff happens in Solidity, do you wait for it to be standardized before you put it into Caro in Camel case, or do you implement it in Caro in Snake case when it's not an ERC, and then it becomes an ERC, and then you have to change everything?
Yeah, just a caveat about what you said about formatting, all those stuff, etc. I think it's not important to standardize that, even though I think it helps to have some idiomatic ways of writing some codes, because it improves readability. Let's say one developer wants to contribute to a project, and if you have a language that incentivizes idiomatic ways, like for example, if you take the example of Go, they by design they want to minimize the different possible ways to do something. Like for example, there is no while because of that, so that everyone uses a for loop. It helps because it helps reading a code that is not your own code, and so I agree. No need to standardize that, but incentivizing some idiomatic ways can help.
Yeah, no, but I mean, we also have to see where it comes from. Like the Camel case comes from like the JavaScript word, whereas the Snake case comes from the Python word. And yeah,
that was my question. Is like, wouldn't it be easier to move everything to Camel case? Like, would that be an option?
Well, the people that say that Caro looks like Python will be unhappy, I guess.
Yeah, but I don't think this will be the case for a long time. I think that Caro 1.0 is living Python. So I wouldn't say this is how do you say it? This should be what affects the decision.
All right. And then I had another question about something that most languages have, but we don't have in Caro. Do you know what it is? Any ideas? Adrien knows. Strings. What's going on with strings? Can we find a standard around this, or can we use tokenize or?
Yeah, I think we should define a standard. There are many different initiatives for them, and this is a problem. There is one in Caro Open, by the way. It's pretty good. The implementation is very good, very well documented, etc. But yeah, I think we need someone to kickstart the standard for strings. This is very important. So yeah.
Yeah, but I think this should be handled by the language itself, right? Okay. No reason to I don't know, to do some very weird library that does that. So okay,
so
let's do it.
Are you saying it's on the roadmap?
Yes, of course.
Okay, you heard it. You heard it here first.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll have strings. Woohoo! Cool.
We can still make a simp about it.
Yeah, of course. All right. One thing that I'd like to see, for example, is a standard around code documentation. I think that would be really important. Do you have any particular topics where you think we need standardization and that it doesn't exist yet?
So regarding that, there is already one simp about the standardization of code comments. It is already live, actually. And we, at Leaders, we kickstarted a tool that automatically generates documentation, and we wanted to comply with the standardization. So it's already ongoing, and this is very important, the documentation effort. So what was your question? Other topics we should...
Yeah, do you have any topics in mind that you'd like to see standardized?
Yeah.
No, I know what's next on my roadmap, and it's like in the works, right? So how do you deploy contracts from accounts? You can have it in many different ways, right? Will it be a deploy function in the account contract? Will it be a different contract that you... I mean, there are many options, and all of them are pretty much the same. And there should be like a standard for all the SDKs to know, to compute in advance the address, and et cetera, et cetera. So I was promised that it will be already ready. But hopefully...
Can devs do something?
What?
Can devs do something?
No. There is a proposal. It does need to be published on Shamans.
Okay.
So there is a proposal on how to do it. So this is like on my immediate to-do list. So
I think we need to standardize messaging because it's both a very powerful tool but also a potential strong attack vector. I definitely see some exploits using L1, L2 messaging. So having some security standardization around L1, L2 messaging can help. Like, what do you do when you receive a message on your Cairo contract in your handler? What are the steps? What should you check, etc.? Like checking the source of the contract. It seems obvious, but I think we need to standardize that and make it straightforward for developers to know what to do when they split their logic between L1 contracts and L2 contracts.
Yeah, I would agree with you on like the account abstraction. In my opinion, is one of the very big strengths of Starknet. It's super helpful to have that natively, that by design. I think it's one of the big things that misses in Ethereum. And obviously we need to standardize the account. And I think the accounts are going to grow in terms of features, of capability, of modularity, like having plugins. I mean, everybody speaks about plugins for accounts now, and I've got so many ideas I want to code. And this can only work if like we standardize also how the plugin system for accounts work. The strengths and the quality of the standardization for the account abstraction will pave the way for amazing use cases in Starknet.
All right. I'm looking at the time. I think it's 45 minutes almost, so I think we need to cut. So, yeah, maybe we have time for questions. I don't know. Yes? No? No? Yes? Do we have a question? No. All right. So we cut. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
okay, thank you very much.